Hello and welcome to this pre-recorded event for GCE PE 6PE04 1V1B Unit 4 coursework. To help you get the most out of this feedback, you may want to have the following documents handy, as we will refer to them during the session. IAG Coursework Guidelines. Your most recent E9 feedback report. This unit requires both centre staff and candidates to submit 4 coursework tasks. And once again, it is pleasing to feedback that the completion of all administration requirements and punctilious administration in meeting deadlines was undertaken in nearly all cases successfully. There were few exceptions to this, with issues still remaining in particular with the depth and quality of evidence required for Task 4.3, Personal Performance, concerning the requirements of 3 formal performances and 8 weeks participation with verified supportive documentation. This will be discussed in more detail later in the presentation. It is pleasing to report that for this examination series, the vast majority of centres completed all the specification requirements in terms of administration successfully. This involved the mathematical calculations on the FAMS forms and the centre CRAF form. Issues were seen, though, on an individual basis concerning the completion of the CRAF examination forms, where some miscalculations took place. The transfer of marks to the OPTEMS forms, or EDI, was completed successfully. But a point of action for the next series. It is advisable to ensure a double check takes place through another staff member or the examinations officer. The adhering to established word counts limit is still a concern for Task 4.2, where candidates have a difficult yet achievable brief to write to a 1,000 word count limit. In most, if not all cases, the exam board deadlines were met. The quality of the e-portfolio evidence, mainly from overseas centres, is improving, with the errors of previous series, such as the depth and quality of the evidence being provided, reflecting the requirements of providing both compulsory and supplementary evidence. Further guidelines will be given later in this presentation. The best quality submissions came from centres where staff have been on approved, as opposed to independent, training courses, have a working knowledge of the IAG and ICE documents and the rubric requirements, therefore understanding in detail what was required of their candidates. Take advice and guidance from your E9 report, and you are advised to review the Pearson website's support exemplar materials. Centres are also reminded that it is an examination board requirement to ensure all candidates have a detailed and validated portfolio for Tasks 4.1 and 4.3, irrespective of the moderation route undertaken. For some candidates involved in live cluster moderations, their portfolios lacked the depth and detail often associated with submissions, therefore suggesting that they may not have completed and evidenced the 3 and 8 ruling. This series has once again proved to be a challenging one for the moderation team. Task 4.1, the development plan, has seen a continued growth in the depth of these tasks, where 20,000 to 30,000 words are now commonplace, and one task exceeded 52,000 words. While centres must be congratulated in guiding their candidates to produce such worthy tasks, they are similarly reminded that this excessive word count is not necessary in order to access the full mark range, or more specifically, gain full marks for this task. The use of the now established checklists for all types of development plans has been effective, but centres are reminded not to rely on these as a simply tick-box process that justifies a high band or full mark. The quality, relevance, integrity and validity of a successful plan is crucial to the final mark awarded. Planning and research, the starting point of the task. On the whole, this section was completed with more appropriate content than seen in previous years. The highest marked pieces of work were often exceptional, and were rewarded with very high, if not full marks out of 20. Some of the material researched by candidates, though, was not applied to the plan, just included as part of this section. Centres are advised to guide candidates to only include what is essential and directly relating to their plan, rather than including anything and everything learned and researched from this and other units in their GCE course. There is some feeling that candidates could achieve top marks by quantity of detail. Where this section was overmarked, it was inevitably where centre assessors award marks for the mere inclusion of sections, rather than the quality of what is produced. Some centres still encourage students to include all the information regarding energy systems, methods of training, all the fitness testing protocols, etc., when it has no direct relevance to their specific development plan. For example, one development plan design to develop strength had 14 pages of information on all the other components of fitness and all fitness testing, which had no relevance to their particular plan, and therefore fell outside the assessment criteria. Some plans were not specific to the candidate or sport, thus they lacked specific and thorough knowledge. There should be a clear link with Task 2.4, looking at areas for development as a performer, leader, or official. One of the areas where candidates are not linking research to the candidate themselves is in the application of energy systems. For instance, the reasons why a particular energy system is being used and the implications for recovery, how they are used by the candidate. Another underdeveloped topic is the application of dietary modifications. Which food types to modify, and then linking this to the demands or requirements of their program. For example, if doing weight training, ensuring that in stating an increase in protein is desirable, then what would be the implication? How much per kilogram of body weight would be suitable per day, and how the candidate is to achieve this? Another example being that much of the work was undertaken on diet and calorie expenditure when looking at the candidate's own diet, but then failing to undertake any dietary modifications and carry this through for the duration of the plan with suitable records and validation. One area of strength was some centres had really explored the use of new technology and sports science equipment. However, there are still candidates failing to investigate cutting-edge technology and how it can be used to measure sports performance in their activities. Candidates undertaking cardiovascular plans should use a heart rate monitor, which is readily and cheaply available. One of the main weaknesses seen has been candidates are still not making the aims clear and failing to actually apply their research to the development plan. Smarter targets were also well covered, but weren't made specific in relation to the candidate's particular plan. Another issue seen was the evidence provided was often extremely similar between candidates in the same centre. And while this is acceptable, the plan is supposed to be unique to the candidate. There is still evidence of an over-reliance on the Borg rating, at the expense of exploring other more reliable technologies. In all, the plans are extensive and detailed for those achieving the top mark band. They were comprehensive and clearly demonstrated an applied knowledge and understanding to the areas that build to a successful outcome. The major consideration for centres is that all the referenced research supports the actual training to be undertaken. It is vital that it is correct. If candidates are marked in the top band, they must make sure they include the relevant intensities in their training. Maybe include lift speeds, recovery times, and clearly include reference to increased intensities that are then recorded and validated throughout the plan. Generally, technical and leader plans were less successful, with many lacking the level of research and information needed to carry out and produce successful outcomes. Where the development plans were undertaken by leaders, and rarely officials, the use of the published checklists helped guide candidates with clear evidence of how their coaching was to be improved, and details of how this was to be measured, other than simply anecdotal comment. The use of the Edexcel exemplar material also contributed to the plans, but should not be seen as the only format to complete an aim. Performing and recording. Details of the sessions logged had more detail and accuracy in many cases, but advice would be to include more factual data on the intensities and adaptations in the programme, as the candidates work through the plan week by week. More centres are using whole group templates facilitating this logging, which is acceptable to a point, but individual differences need to be recorded. Evidence of overload was applied in most cases, but less obvious in the weaker candidates' work. A major issue is some candidates tend to include all of their training sessions undertaken in the week. For example, team football training, swimming club sessions, etc. They therefore may only be undertaking one session per week for their development plan. It must be emphasized that club sessions don't form part of the plan, as they are out of the control of the candidate, even though they may aid a general candidate's sports development. Validation of attendance and testing should be seen as an integral part of this section, but is still missed out by many candidates and centre staff. There is also an issue of leaders using the same logs of training for both sessions, tasks 4.1 and 4.3, which is generally not acceptable. To achieve parity with those undertaking a physiological plan, a separate and specific set of sessions should be undertaken. Statements that the candidates had completed the programs were also weak and lacked creditability. But a witness statement would be a simple methodology to rectify this. Review and evaluation. Most candidates claim their plan was successful because of improvement in their selected fitness test scores. but fail to then make a link to their actual performance. Higher marked candidates gave an evaluation on all sections of the plan in the tests used and methods of training chosen, for example, and this was a useful addition. A further analysis of possible physiological adaptations indicated a greater level of knowledge and understanding. This section was, though, often overmarked, with marks awarded for simply presenting results. In general, the higher quality review and evaluation section of the task included objective and quantitative information to justify conclusions. Graphs and tables should be used to illustrate progress, and analysis of data was evident. However, some evaluations are still too subjective. The best evaluations use a notational analysis of their performance to help conclude whether the development plan improves their performance, and thereby offering objective support for the outcomes. At times, video has also been submitted. Thus, another weakness of this section was a failing to acknowledge how performance improvements have been improved. For most candidates, this is a simply brief statement indicating they had some performance improvement. A witness statement signed by an appropriate adult, coach, or PE staff, indicating they have improved and specifically making a connection to the training carried out, is a useful strategy for centres to use. Summary. The best and high-marked development plans contained clear aims, detailed training loads, correct testing, and applied scientific knowledge. Some students are not working at the appropriate intensities to meet their aims. The recording sections should have detailed factual information, as opposed to simple diaries. The review and evaluations, when well written, have validation, objective data, and evidence of how their performance had improved. Task 4.2 International Study. This task continues to be a challenge to even the most able candidates. This is not due to the demands of the task in terms of intention, but due to the word count limit of 1,000 words. The best tasks, and more have been seen this year, contain detailed factual reference data that supports the points being made. Coverage of the three main areas of community sport, school sport, and finally elite provisions and pathways should be supported by case studies of a typical school, local club, and then an elite club and a sensible use of footnotes. Guidance to both of these is available on the Edexcel website. This task inevitably is a web-based project, and as such requires perseverance in researching information. The higher marked tasks included those relevant factual details relating to participation in terms of the participating in schools and clubs, while not dismissing gender differences, routes to regional and national representation, and finally funding provisions. One area that seems to be consistently glossed over is the accurate funding information, both at grassroots level and at national levels, from full international teams to development squads. The role of the respective government's national strategic elite planning is often overlooked, yet central to successful national programs. Where tasks only assess the mid-mark range, they inevitably lack the factual detail mentioned above, were too generic, or in some cases, relied on out-of-date information. The overuse of misconceptions still exists, particularly when looking at the countries of USA and Australia. The nature of this task requires applied research, hence some candidates refer to and rely on an appendix too much, by simply copying and pasting masses of information into this section, hoping this will gain extra marks. But the appendices are excluded from the moderation process. Validation of the comments made in the text by referencing the relevant information gains valuable marks. Too much emphasis at times is placed on the geography and topography details of the country. Centres need to offer clearer guidance to candidates on creating a balance between the content areas and the words allocated to each. The biggest criticism for the international studies has been a lack of detailed coverage of all the areas that make up the local and national setting, even though, as mentioned, this is a tough ask in 1,000 words. Many candidates selected Australia or New Zealand, but included virtually nothing on the schools provision, so crucial in the country's sporting profile. By the same token, candidates covering the USA were limited in providing information on professional competition formats, or the role of the NCAA, or addressing labour migration issues, such as scholarships to universities in the USA. Many candidates were able to provide detailed information on the ethos of a country, and included critical comments. But one of the weaker areas was little detail on national team preparation, pathways, and competition formats. The overriding observation was the lack of specific factual detail to support some very generic comment. Some, but increasingly fewer candidates, are still selecting inappropriate nations or activities. Many candidates exceeded the word count limit for this task, and were liberal with the truth on the craft form, even though this would have been authenticated by the centre assessor. A point worth noting. Summary. The best tasks cover all the content areas, supported by factual reference data. Tasks that use appropriate case studies enrich and contextualise the tasks appropriately. Word counts should be strictly adhered to. Task 4.3 Personal Performance. Centres have responded with some success to the reinforcement of the compulsory evidence ruling of 3 formal performances and 8 weeks participation. There are many ways to evidence this, and centres are reminded that failure to satisfy this stipulation will result in a 0 mark. Once again, where debate exists beyond this ruling, it is inevitably centred on the quality of a performance relative to the assessment criteria. In some cases, satisfying the 3 and 8 ruling has been interpreted as a full mark award, where as other evidence is required to justify this, such as video, relative standards of a team or league, and the use of the witness statement. E-portfolio submissions are still experiencing some issues, where centres fail to supply the depth of evidence to judge the quality of a candidate's performance. It is relatively easy to compile the rubric, 3 and 8, of the course, but more difficult to present evidence that will enable the moderation team to make judgments on the quality of the performer. The resulting difficulty is that where no video evidence was on offer, it was extremely difficult to differentiate at times between the mark ranges of candidates. Practical marks tended to be lower than live moderation because of the lack of evidence to support marks. Compulsory evidence again was well documented, not so other forms such as video. Watch the video, Activity 2. Some centres offering e-portfolio evidence still did not follow the guidelines on submissions, and as a result requests for more evidence were issued, for example, for dance. Identifying candidates on DVD or video was still a concern with some centres. Overall, performances ranged from above average to excellent in the mainstream sports, such as football, rugby, cricket, hockey and netball, as well as in those less mainstream sports. A2 candidates specialising in a single performance role have produced outstanding performances this year, and the moderation team have seen many international standard performances, while not losing sight of the less able candidates who have still accessed the mid-range mark band. Few, if any, candidates scored under half marks for this task. In the main, students were highly motivated at cluster moderation days, and it was obvious they were eager to achieve the best possible marks. Feedback from moderators has indicated that well-planned and differentiated sessions also enhance the students' performance. There was a correlation between the well-organized and well-differentiated sessions and a student's performance, and the least well-organized sessions where lower marks were awarded to candidates. This could also be a reflection of the expertise of individual staff in centres and points for improvement for centres. It has been pleasing to also see the wider range of sports and activities being presented by candidates, such as dance. The range of dance was extensive, ranging from hip-hop, street, ballroom, Latin to ethnic Indian. And it is pleasing to see sports and activities ranging from skiing to horse riding. Video evidence is still the most complete way to present a candidate's performance abilities, if unable or not required to perform at a live cluster moderation. And while not a compulsory requirement for on-site activities, for off-site sports and activities it should be used, where it is impractical to see a live performance. Individual activities, while assessed with some accuracy, were littered with centres which failed to ensure that the student had completed 3 competitive performances within that year. Gymnastics, dance, swimming and athletics were all activities where some students failed to have competitive, and in some cases a completed 8-week participation log, evidence for the appropriate period. Where candidates are compiling CDs or DVDs for their performance roles, some of these resemble a trailer for a movie, in that they flash from one image to another at a remarkable rate. While it is encouraging to see candidates embracing modern technology, they should remember they are producing a CD or DVD to assess their sports performance. Candidates should also be careful to ensure their choice of music does not use bad language. This is unacceptable. It is suggested that leaders do not have music, as often this made it difficult to decipher the coaching points they were delivering. A recurring issue for all performance roles using video is the identification of candidates, camera angles, and focus on the particular candidate under assessment. At times, the camera is too far from the action, no identification takes place, or the structured practices are too simplistic. A reliance and acceptance of a mark awarded by outside coach or instructor has not always been accurate to the application of the assessment criteria. The lead centre assessor must ensure standards have been applied accurately through a process of internal standardization. Leader or official. The vast majority of performers submitting roles as either leader or official were accurately marked and gained top band marks. Leaders and officials were generally well prepared, with accurate logs available, although these were of varying standards. Candidates continue to perform better as participants than as officials or leaders. Centre staff are reminded that if guiding candidates through the leadership and officiating roles, then documentary evidence of the training they have undergone is a compulsory requirement, as well as the minimum of 3 formal opportunities to display their abilities in these roles. The better leadership and official candidates had practical activities well planned, but only those with wider experience were able to adjust their sessions when required. Candidates dressed appropriately and acted assertively, justifying good marks. Although some centres did not always provide supporting information for their marks. Candidates did tend to have participation logs and session plans, and included their own evaluations of their progress. However, very few had peer, teacher, coach evaluations related to the specification, which would have provided stronger support for the marks given. Moderating leadership created the most discussion and request for support and advice. The interpretation of 3 formal competitive or applied performance opportunities was still not clear enough for all centres, and attention is drawn to exemplars on the Edexcel website. The best centres include a qualitative assessment, which included statements on organisation, motivation, communication, knowledge of the sport, and appropriate development of the session to the strengths and weaknesses of the group in the environment of that moment. Although welfare and safety concerns were referred to, centres need to ensure their candidates develop these areas, giving examples from their experience during the 8 weeks of leadership. For example, there should be evidence that consideration has been given to the difference between a 17-year-old playing rugby and introducing tag rugby to a mixed-gender group of 11-year-old pupils. This would also demonstrate an understanding of safety and child protection and welfare issues, which is not only paramount, but also compulsory. There is some feedback to suggest there is greater inconsistency in leadership, which tends to be marked leniently and by a higher margin. Inconsistency comes from schools using a variety of either sports-specific leadership or general leader training. A number use NGB or CSLA awards as entry to higher mark bands, but fail to fully support this with a range of evaluative means. Sessions led tend to be written up and have the leader's evaluation, but rarely the essential staff member or coach's validation. Summary. Centres are reminded of the need to keep a performance log for each candidate at A2. Candidates are required, as with the e-portfolio, to keep a log of the rubric requirements of 3 formal performances and a minimum of 8 weeks participation. Centres must ensure there is sufficient detailed evidence to satisfy the quality of the performance. E-portfolios should make use of the witness statement. Video evidence needs to be of a higher quality with candidate identification, a closer focus with higher quality and more demanding practices. Task 4.4. The Life Plan. The overall standard of the life plans ranged from excellent to too simplistic, but in general, centres and therefore their candidates seem to have embraced this task when applying a sociological perspective to a sporting timeline. The task is best presented by breaking the life plan down into 5 clear sections. Typically, this should be 16 to 18, 18 to 21, 22 to 35, 35 to 50, and then 50 plus. For the first section, ages from 16 to 18, most candidates included their present state aspirations and commitment. The majority of moderators agreed this was well covered. However, links to inhibiting factors were generally not explored at this stage. A number of candidates made use of NHS guidelines to discuss appropriate exercises for youth ages. Timeline band 18 to 22 saw candidates including their immediate options, such as their chosen university, but some failed to identify specifically which university and what particular provisions were available to them. Higher marked tasks researched alternative provisions outside the university environment. Most candidates researched sports and physical activities on offer, but failed to discuss with any purpose what is the perceived level of commitment, training, travel requirements, etc. A number of candidates discussed the inhibiting factors, academic studies, and financial constraints. Some candidates explored the option of a gap year on the completion of their studies, and briefly mentioned how that will affect their participation in their sport. This was a welcomed inclusion. Timeline band 22 to 35 should highlight inhibiting factors such as career, family, finances, and potential injury, and include strategies to overcome them. Top band candidates were able to use societal statistics to qualify their decisions. However, in general, candidates threw in chart statistics on marriage, family, children, finance, work, and house purchase, but did not engage in analytical discussion on how this will have an effect on their performance or commitment in their chosen activities. Participation rates, alternative sports and leisure pursuits, and the impact of injuries must be included. Timeline band 35 to 45 is perhaps where the biggest changes in sporting participation occur. Alternative options with moves into coaching, refereeing, or administration, possible alternative non-competitive sport options, in general were covered, and many highlighted inhibiting factors, such as injury. However, in many cases, this era lacked specificity to the candidate, and in many cases became very generic. Candidates did mention changes in attitude and physiological changes. Top band candidates did back up their statements with national and sport-specific statistics to qualify the candidates' decisions. But unfortunately, there are still a number of candidates who simply describe where they see themselves in the future, and they had no research to qualify statements. their discussions and analysis was fairly weak. Career, family life, and health issues should all be explored in detail. Timeline 50+ should also include physiological changes and strategies to cope with the aging process. It should also include realistic later life activity and sports options, and support this with referenced factual details related to general health trends, chronic heart disease, and/or osteoarthritis. At every stage, candidates should support their work with research and statistics. The majority of life plans had charts and statistics, but again in many cases were very generic and tended to lose the personalized plan. The need for candidates to research national, societal, health, participation, drop-off and injury rates in more detail and use them to qualify decision-making throughout the life plan is crucial to access the top mark band. A minority of centres still seem unaware that there is no word count for the life plan. Some centres encouraged candidates to produce very extensive appendices. This would also help the flow of the plan for the reader. A small minority of centres failed to follow and identify timeline phases, and as a result, the work produced was very poor in standard. Summary. Ensure an appropriate and personal timeline is established. Support each section of the timeline with factual data on provisions, participation rates, health and career implications, along with injury probabilities. Balance each section with alternative sport options and personal preferences. Use references to add objectivity to the task. FAQs. Question. What can I do if a candidate is injured and cannot undertake their development plan task 4.1? Answer. They have several options. Firstly, undertake a rehabilitation program to regain full fitness. Use a surrogate person who will undertake the plan for you. You act as a fitness trainer. Finally, change the plan to another component that you are able to undertake, even though injured. Question. Can a candidate change their sports option and/or role for Task 4.3 from the AS course? Answer. Yes. The A2 course is a separate award. Question. What if a candidate becomes injured? Answer. They must change sports or roles from performer to leader or official. Officials must not be simply recorders of fact. Question. What are the options in selecting an appropriate country for Task 4.2, the international study? Answer. Candidates have a free option here. They can change role if no information is available, and should focus on English-speaking countries if possible, as information is easier to obtain. However, it is acceptable to change a minority sport to a more common one, and confirmation can be obtained from using the Ask the Expert service. Question. Is the word count of 1,000 words strictly adhered to by the moderation team? Answer. Yes. Moderation stops at 1,000 words, and any content after that is excluded. Question. The life plan has no word count limit, but what would be a suitable length? Answer. This is a difficult one, as some candidates do vast tasks, but ideally 1,500 to 3,000 should be sufficient if the writing is succinct.